Greetings, and thank you for joining us for an important IEA reporter interview. I'm Dave Harbison, Communications Director of the Idaho Education Association. One of the most controversial topics at this late stage of the legislative session has been the failure to pass public education budgets over concerns about the indoctrination of Idaho students in topics like critical race theory, Marxism, and leftist agendas. Joining us to provide some knowledge and context on this issue is IEA member Kathy Davis, who's from St. Mary's. Kathy's a veteran educator and currently also serves as the chair of Idaho's Professional Standards Commission. Kathy, let's start with just a little bit of context on what the PSC is and does and how your group might be relevant in this discussion. And is this legislation that's being considered by the legislature regarding this issue, is it even necessary or relevant?
Thank you. So at this point, I have been with the PSC, which is the Professional Standards Commission for the state of Idaho, operates under the State Department of Education, and it is comprised of, the commission is comprised of stakeholders, all the major stakeholders in the state. So we have representation from K-12, higher ed, superintendents, administrators, kind of every facet that makes up the education system. We are charged with making recommendations to the Board of Education regarding teacher certification, standards for teacher certification. We look at also, we're charged with the ethical things that may arise. The Code of Ethics is approved by the Board of Education, and all teachers are expected to adhere to that Code of Ethics. And so one of the other things we do is if there's a complaint regarding a violation of one of those codes, that comes before the commission for consideration and possible disciplinary action if it's warranted. So that's some of the work we do. Our goal is to ensure that we have great teachers in Idaho. They're competent, they're ethical, and we want to ensure and maintain that in classrooms for our students.
I'm glad you brought up the Code of Ethics, because that is sort of the guiding document or premise, if you will, for Idaho educators. It's already in place. It seems like that would cover most of what's being talked about here by the legislature in terms of indoctrination or one side only of a particular issue or story. Doesn't the Code of Ethics, and then with the PSC behind it, doesn't that cover it already?
The Code of Ethics has 10 principles, and within that, it seems to me that all aspects related to teaching are embedded in that document. And some of the things that you mentioned in your opening are addressed specifically within that document as a professional expectation. And there is language within that document that addresses that. And given that that document is, we look at that document regularly, update it, see if there's any language that needs adjusting, and make those slight revisions as needed. And then it goes before the Board of Ed, and it's ultimately their approval that makes the difference. So it does seem like there's, that structure is there to address any kind of policy issues that someone might have in question, that seems like the place that would be addressed.
So let's take this maybe one step further and answer either wearing your PSC hat or your veteran educator hat, whichever makes the most sense. But is this issue something that should even be under the purview of the legislators, most of whom really don't have any firsthand experience in a classroom? And a secondary question is, should education budgets and the votes on education budgets, should those be dictated by policy discussions like we're having here?
I would agree that as this issue has, and what my knowledge of it has brought to mind is I am confused why the two things are coupled. To me, they seem like very distinct differences. As an educator, when I hear that budgets are under consideration, whether they're at the local level or the state level, my thinking is that we're considering what expenses will there be, and what are the costs to ensure that we're meeting the needs of our students, that our buildings are staffed and they're maintained, and curriculums there, and those kinds of considerations. And once that's determined, this is how much money it takes, then it seems like it becomes like, are those reasonable amounts? Do we have to shift some things in the budget to make that work? Those seem like budget decisions to me about finances. Some of the things you brought up, both as an educator, I think, when I consider policy, what am I supposed to be teaching? When I plan my lessons, the expectation is that I'm teaching to Idaho standards, and those standards, I don't create those on my own. Those standards are provided by the state of Idaho. So teachers that are meeting their requirements, adhering to ethics, adhering to the expectations in their contract, are teaching to the standards provided by the state. And if there is some question about if we should be adding or admitting, or those things need adjusted, those seem to be discussions that should be viewed separately from financial decisions, and but bring in knowledgeable people to have that discussion.
You brought up standards, and those are set, as you noted, at the state level. But curriculum or curricula is not. It's a locally driven metric, correct?
I haven't served on a curriculum committee for probably about 5 years now, but the times I have served in those capacities, multiple times, we were provided as locally and as departments in our buildings with a few publishers to take a look at. And it was my understanding, unless something changed, like I said, I haven't been involved in the last couple of years. My understanding with those initial publishers were chosen from some state approved lists, but I'm not an expert on that. When we did view curriculum, we reviewed it extensively in the building, and in the district, and it was a local issue, but we were constantly matching it to the standards. That was where we started. It has to adhere to the standards, or we can't even consider a big ticket item purchase like that we are going to use in our buildings for several years. So it would definitely start at the standards, and then beyond that, it's, how is the curriculum packaged, and does it meet the number of students we have, and the programs we have going? Those things would drive it.
All right, so it goes from standards to curriculum, and then to the classroom experience, where the teacher typically and traditionally has had a fair amount of academic freedom to be able to teach the standards, and teach to the standards, and teach the curriculum the way they feel is most appropriate based on their students, their experience, and their training. I think that's one of the concerns here among educators, is that academic freedom is in jeopardy here. Do you feel that way?
I do. I do worry about that. We all agree, and if you're working in a team and you're working in your grade level or your department, we depend on every teacher to be working toward those standards so we don't have gaps, and that the students are more likely to be fluid from one grade to the next, or building to the next within the district. So that's important. It's also important to, every teacher has a little bit different style, and different creative notes that they have. And so it's really important to, yes, we expect that teacher to cover that standard with their students, but at the same time, how can they bring their own expertise into it to best highlight that, and also adjust that the students that are sitting in front of them, your delivery may work one way better than another. And so I think it's really important to continue to allow that for our teachers.
So what might students be missing out on then if open discussion about various issues, including potentially sensitive ones, is prohibited through this legislation or through the Lieutenant Governor's task force or whatever mechanism might be in play here? And how might educators be forced to do their work differently?
One of my concerns is, I've taught for many years, and I've never had an experience where an educator was not cognizant when they were in a situation that sensitive things could come up, and you don't know what corner that may pop around, because you can be reading a fictional story and there's a character or some historical, I think that's sometimes where people get more worried, some historical events that have to be discussed. And I worry that, as teachers, and having done it multiple years, sometimes you can expect certain questions. And you can be ready for those, and you can drive that discussion and manage that discussion in a way that's respectful for all. And sometimes something you didn't expect could come. I worry that teachers may be so on guard that they might touch a nerve somewhere inadvertently, that they become afraid to even host those discussions. And so it becomes just, I just feel like students will miss out on being able to think through some ideas and share those with some of their those collegial discussions are so important for kids to help in their understanding. And I just worry that we become very reluctant to have that kind of interaction.
It helps in their understanding, but as I understand it, it also is geared toward building their skill set when it comes to critical thinking and problem solving, and having these discussions and being able to respectfully disagree, things like that.
Yes, and it's such an important skill as we look at lifelong learners, that you can have those dialogues. And it's interesting, as part of our standards, coming to those kind of discussions is part of our expectations when we're looking at standards and having kids interact in those capacities. And so it does worry me that we will become somewhat stagnant in that, and we won't foster that kind of thinking and reasoning and sharing.
Kathy, let's close with this. We're talking about some very emotionally charged words being thrown around here: indoctrination and leftist agendas and Marxism and freedom of speech, dignity, discrimination. Can you boil it down to what this issue or this question or this debate is really all about?
I wish I could. I think, considering your question, those, as you said, they're hot topics, and they're so emotionally charged, and they trigger things in people that have very passionate feelings. And I think one of the things as teachers, we're not good about talking about what we do. We're busy, we're busy with our students and our
Right.
instruction. And I think somehow unintentionally that creates a void. And because we're not talking about what we're doing, it leaves an opportunity for other people to fill that with information that may not always be on target. Um, the words that you mentioned in your question, a lot of people are very, very quick to identify how they feel about those things, and they seem like they, it instantly brings up some kind of emotional response. And I think sometimes it's hard to get them to ask the question or look for the information that would help them understand it. I heard educators many times, when you speak of legislators, wish that they would like to invite them in, see what's happening, so that they have a better understanding about what is happening in classrooms. I wander through, work with a great team of people, and they're passionate about making sure their kids are prepared, and worry about policies that will, create barriers for getting that done. Teachers want their students to be prepared to learn, be prepared, become well-rounded citizens. And I don't know of teachers that have an agenda for something different. They're looking for the best situation for their students and the best academic experience.
Well, it's obviously something we'll all be watching in the weeks and months ahead, but we appreciate Kathy Davis from St. Mary's, longtime IEA member, joining us to give us your perspective as a veteran educator and also in your role as the chair of the PSC. Kathy, thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave.